In the spring of 2001, a professor named David Bainbridge submitted a paper to the journal Agricultural Water Management that should have changed everything. He had spent 15 years studying an ancient irrigation method that used 90% less water than conventional systems. His research showed it outperformed modern drip irrigation. It required no electricity, no pumps, no filters, no pressure systems, and no maintenance. A simple clay pot buried in the soil delivered water directly to plant roots for weeks at a time. His paper documented successful trials across 3 continents. It referenced a Chinese agricultural text from 2,100 years ago that described the exact same technique. The journal published his findings. Academic citations slowly accumulated, then nothing happened. The irrigation equipment industry, worth $11 billion annually, continued selling pumps, pipes, sprinklers, and drip systems to farmers around the world. Universities continued teaching conventional irrigation in every agriculture program. Extension services continued recommending expensive infrastructure to struggling farmers. A method that could have saved billions of gallons of water and billions of dollars in equipment costs remained confined to academic journals that almost no one reads. The industry did not ban the research. They did something more effective. They ignored it into obscurity. Welcome to nature's lost vault. Fan Shengji was documenting a practice that had already been refined for centuries before his time. Archaeological evidence suggests buried clay pot irrigation originated independently in at least 2 regions approximately 4,000 years ago. Farmers along the Yellow River in northern China developed one tradition. Farmers in the arid zones of North Africa developed another. The technique spread along trade routes to Persia, to India, to the Arabian Peninsula, and eventually throughout Latin America after Spanish colonization. Every civilization that encountered water scarcity eventually discovered the same solution. Bury a porous clay pot in the ground, fill it with water. Let the soil and the plants regulate the flow. The Spanish called these pots olas, pronounced ollas, which simply means clay pot in their language. The term stuck. Today, anyone searching for information on this ancient technology will find it under the name olla irrigation. But for 4,000 years, farmers needed no special vocabulary. They simply knew that a buried pot kept their crops alive. The Romans encountered olla irrigation when they expanded eastward. Pliny the Elder documented the use of buried vessels for irrigation in his Natural History, the encyclopedia he compiled in the 1st century CE. The technique was practiced in gardens from Spain to Syria. Roman farmers valued it for the same reasons Chinese farmers had valued it 1,000 years earlier. It delivered water without waste. It kept the soil surface dry, reducing weed pressure. It allowed crops to grow in conditions that would otherwise have been too arid for cultivation. When the Roman Empire collapsed, the knowledge persisted in the regions where water scarcity made it essential. Farmers in North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia continued burying clay pots in their fields, century after century, while Europe forgot the practice entirely. The technique survived not through written transmission, but through practical necessity. Where water was scarce, the method that saved the most water endured. The Persians refined the technique and integrated it with their legendary Connaught irrigation systems. Indian farmers along the Thar Desert developed regional variations adapted to local clay compositions and soil types. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the Americas, they brought olla irrigation to Mexico and the American Southwest, where it merged with indigenous water conservation practices. The technique found particularly fertile ground among the Pueblo peoples, who had already developed sophisticated dryland agriculture. By the 19th century, buried clay pot irrigation was practiced on every inhabited continent except Australia. It was arguably the most widespread and successful irrigation technology in human history, yet almost no one in the industrialized world had ever heard of it. The science behind olla irrigation was not understood until the 20th century, but the principles are now well documented. An unglazed clay pot is porous. Its walls are filled with microscopic channels that allow water molecules to pass through slowly. When the pot is buried in dry soil, the water inside begins seeping outward through these channels. But the seepage is not constant. It is regulated by the soil moisture tension in the surrounding earth. When the soil is dry, the tension pulls water out of the pot more rapidly. When the soil becomes saturated from rain or recent filling, the tension decreases and the seepage slows or stops entirely. The plant roots sense the moisture gradient and grow toward the pot. Eventually, they wrap around the clay surface and draw water directly through the pores as they need it. The system is self-regulating. It cannot overwater because the water only moves when the soil demands it. It cannot underwater because the reservoir maintains available moisture continuously. No electronic sensor, no timer, no human judgment is required. The physics of capillary action and soil water potential do all the work. The efficiency numbers are staggering when compared to conventional methods. In 2001, Professor David Bainbridge at Alliant International University compiled research from trials conducted in India, Pakistan, Mexico, Kenya, and the American Southwest. His findings, published in Agricultural Water Management, documented that buried clay pots could deliver equivalent crop yields using only 10% of the water required by conventional surface irrigation. A study in India compared melon production using OLIS versus flood irrigation. The ALA irrigated plots produced 25 tons per hectare using only 2 centimeters of water. The flood irrigated plots produced 33 tons per hectare using 26 centimeters of water. The conventional method used 13 times more water to achieve only 30% more yield. A separate trial with cucumbers showed that 1.9 centimeters of water delivered through buried pots produced yields equivalent to 7.3 centimeters delivered by hand irrigation. The water savings ranged from 74 to 90% depending on the crop and conditions. In 2013, researchers in Kenya published a study comparing ALA irrigation to furrow irrigation for maize and tomatoes in the Lake Bogoria region. The results were even more dramatic than the earlier Indian trials. For maize, the ALA system saved 97.1% of applied water while increasing yield per unit of water by 32.2%. For tomatoes, the water savings reached 97.8% with yield improvements of 43.7% per unit of water. The researchers concluded that buried clay pot irrigation was dramatically more efficient than any conventional system they had tested. Similar results have been documented in Zimbabwe, Sudan, Pakistan, and Ethiopia. The evidence is consistent across continents, climates, crops, and research teams. Buried clay pots work. They work better than almost anything the modern irrigation industry has developed, and they cost almost nothing to implement. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. The global irrigation equipment market is projected to reach nearly $16 billion by 2031. Drip irrigation alone represents a $7 to $8 billion segment growing at nearly 11% annually. Companies like Netafim, Jane Irrigation Systems, the Toro Company, and Rainbird Corporation have built massive global operations selling tubing, emitters, filters, pumps, controllers, sensors, and associated hardware to farmers worldwide. Government subsidies in dozens of countries support the adoption of modern irrigation infrastructure. International development programs promote drip systems as the solution to water scarcity in arid regions. The entire agricultural water management establishment has oriented itself around selling equipment. A buried clay pot threatens none of this directly because it operates in a different category entirely. It does not compete with commercial drip systems on large industrial farms. But it does offer an alternative for the hundreds of millions of small farmers worldwide who cannot afford modern irrigation infrastructure. Consider the economics from a manufacturer's perspective. A commercial drip irrigation system requires replacement emitters every few years as they clog with mineral deposits. It requires replacement tubing as UV radiation degrades the plastic. It requires filters, pressure regulators, timers, and eventually pumps when components fail. Every installation generates a stream of future purchases. The business model depends on consumables. A clay pot has no consumables. It does not degrade in sunlight. It does not clog because the entire surface is the emitter. If mineral deposits eventually reduce flow, a simple overnight soak in vinegar restores full function. A farmer who buries clay pots in their field today may never spend another dollar on irrigation equipment. From a shareholder value perspective, this technology represents a threat to recurring revenue models that sustain the entire industry. The reason ALA irrigation has not spread is not that it was proven ineffective. Professor Bainbridge's paper explicitly states that efficient traditional methods of irrigation that could be of great use on small and medium-sized farms and gardens have not been well studied or publicized. He notes that international development programs have largely ignored low-cost, simple irrigation methods for dryland agriculture. The technology exists, the research exists, the evidence is overwhelming. But the institutional infrastructure that funds agricultural research, trains extension agents, and shapes development policy is oriented towards systems that require ongoing purchases. A clay pot has no consumables. It requires no replacement parts. It generates no recurring revenue. A farmer who installs an ALA system once may never need to spend money on irrigation again. From a business perspective, this is a technology with no commercial future. From a humanitarian perspective, this is exactly what hundreds of millions of water-stressed farmers need. Here is what this means for anyone watching right now. You do not need a $15 billion industry to water your garden. You do not need pumps, timers, sensors, or drip lines. You need an unglazed terracotta pot, a saucer or lid to cover the opening, and enough ambition to dig a hole. The standard terracotta flower pots available at any garden center work if you plug the drainage hole. Silicone sealant or a wine cork will do the job. Bury the pot so only the rim is above ground level. Fill it with water. Cover the opening to prevent evaporation and keep insects out. Plant your vegetables within 18 to 24 inches of the pot's edge. The water will seep outward through the clay and find your plant roots. A 1-gallon pot will irrigate a circle roughly 2 feet in diameter. A larger pot extends the range proportionally. There's another benefit that modern irrigation systems cannot match. All irrigation works with saline water and in saline soils where conventional irrigation fails completely. Research in India demonstrated that tomato yields of 27 tons per hectare were achieved using irrigation water with electrical conductivity of 10.2 millimos per centimeter. That is water so salty it would destroy crops under conventional flood or sprinkler irrigation. The slow seepage through clay walls carries water to the roots while leaving most mineral salts concentrated at the edge of the wetted zone. The plant extracts clean water from the immediate vicinity of the pot, while the salts migrate outward where they cause less damage. Farmers in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu have used this technique for generations in regions where groundwater salinity would otherwise make agriculture impossible. The best crops for alla irrigation are heavy feeders with extensive root systems. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, melons, and cucumbers respond exceptionally well. Their roots naturally grow toward moisture sources and will eventually surround the buried pot. Leafy greens work but may need supplemental surface watering until their root systems establish. Root vegetables like carrots and parsnips are less suitable because their growth patterns do not allow them to reach the buried water source effectively. Fruit trees and perennial shrubs can be established with alla irrigation and then gradually weaned off as their root systems deepen. Some growers in the American Southwest use ollas specifically for tree establishment in desert conditions where conventional irrigation would be impractical or prohibitively expensive. There's another advantage that rarely gets mentioned. Alla irrigation dramatically reduces weeding labor. A study in India found that the dry weight of weeds was only 62 kilograms per hectare using ollas compared to 465 kilograms per hectare with basin irrigation. The surface soil stays dry because water is delivered underground. Weed seeds on the surface never receive the moisture trigger they need to germinate. Traditional farming systems have documented that as much as 30% of total farm labor goes to weeding. Alla irrigation can eliminate most of this burden, freeing that labor for more productive activities. The technology does not just save water. It saves time, saves money, and reduces backbreaking work. Refilling frequency depends on temperature, soil type, pot size, and plant demand. In moderate conditions, a 1-gallon pot may need refilling every 5 to 7 days. In hot summer weather, with actively growing plants, you may refill every 2 to 3 days. Some commercial alla systems now connect multiple pots to a central reservoir using drip tubing, allowing automatic refilling through gravity flow from a raised tank or rain barrel. This combines the water efficiency of buried clay with the convenience of automated delivery. You can build such a system yourself using terracotta pots, standard drip irrigation tubing, and a 5-gallon bucket elevated on a stand. The entire setup costs less than a single commercial drip irrigation starter kit and will last for decades with minimal maintenance. For those who want dedicated irrigation ollas rather than modified flower pots, several small manufacturers now produce purpose-built vessels. These typically feature narrow necks to minimize evaporation, thicker walls for durability, and optimized porosity for consistent seepage rates. Prices range from $15 to $40 depending on size and quality. A set of 4 ollas can irrigate a substantial raised bed garden for the cost of a single soaker hose system. The pots must be removed and stored indoors over winter in regions with hard freezes to prevent cracking. This is the only significant maintenance requirement. Some minerals from hard water may eventually clog the pores, but scrubbing with vinegar or brief refiring in a kiln restores full function. The deeper lesson here extends beyond gardening. This is a technology that works better than modern alternatives for specific applications. It has been validated by peer-reviewed research. It has been practiced successfully for 4,000 years. It remains almost unknown because no corporation profits from its adoption. The information exists in academic journals that farmers never read, and extension bulletins that were never written. You now have that information. You can implement it this weekend for less than the cost of a restaurant meal. And you can watch your water bill drop while your plants thrive on a fraction of the irrigation you once provided. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every like and share preserves what they tried to erase. I will see you in the next one.